You are listening to 13 Past Midnight with Steve Stockton.
I was just a child when this happened, about 10 or so, but I've never forgotten it, and I never will. It was in the fall of the year, so it would have been early October. We'd gone up into Ohio for the weekend to visit my grandmother, who still lived on the family farm after my grandfather had passed away the year before. I was out wandering around in the huge yard and decided to go for a stroll through the cornfield adjacent. Now, if you've never seen a cornfield in Ohio or Indiana, these can be massive, covering many, many acres. The ears of corn had already been harvested, and I was having a grand time walking through the dead stalks that had yet to be plowed under. I remember it seeming spooky, like that Stephen King movie, Children of the Corn. Heck, I have expected Bigfoot to pop out from between the rows. After what seemed like miles, was probably only actually a quarter mile or so, I came out of either the back or the side of the cornfield. I'd been running around like a wild ape and wasn't sure which way was which at this point. The rows all looked the same after a while when you're a kid and not paying attention. I couldn't see the farmhouse anywhere. Instead had the not so bright idea to head into the woods. If I'd found the cornfield confusing, then the woods were 100 times more so, at least. I was a smart aleck suburban kid. We lived on a cul-de-sac, for crying out loud. Who thought he knew everything there was to know about the woods? Boy, was I ever in for a surprise. I was just moseying along, looking at rocks and trees and birds and squirrels. I noticed it was starting to get dark. It was already kind of dark in the woods anyway, but I hadn't noticed the quickly setting sun, so it would be really, really dark soon. Instead of panicking, I did have at least enough sense to keep my head about me and ignore the urge to just start running in any particular direction. Although now I know that the best thing to do if you're lost in the woods is to stay in one place, otherwise you'll end up walking in circles without even realizing it, I decided to hike my way out of the woods. I had no idea which way the farm or the main road or anything was, so I just picked a direction and started walking. By now it was completely pitch black in the woods. I didn't have any kind of light with me, of course, and I couldn't see any lights anywhere in the distance. I just kept walking and finally sat down beneath a huge tree and wept. I was truly, absolutely lost in the woods. After I'd been sitting for probably 15 minutes or so, I stopped crying and decided to get up and start walking again. As I continued to make my way through the maze of trees and dense brush, I heard a sound off to my right. Thinking it might be someone looking for me, I called out. No response came, but I could hear the sounds getting closer. A couple minutes later, the biggest, blackest dog I've ever seen poked his massive head out of the bush. And this dog was immense, kind of like a Labrador, but even bigger. Looking back, it may have even been a Mastiff or some kind of Great Dane hybrid. At first, I was sure the huge beast was going to eat me, or at least tear me to shreds. And at that point, I almost didn't care. Instead, the dog walked right over to me and, while wagging his massive tail, licked my hand. I petted him for a few minutes and was amazed at how beautiful he was. He wasn't wearing a collar, but he looked healthy and very clean. His coat was soft and shiny, not ragged and full of burrs and ticks like you might find on a dog roaming in the woods. I began walking again. At least now I had some company. The dog eventually began walking in front of me, and every few feet would stop and look back, as if urging me to keep following him. I was so tired that all I wanted to do was find a place to sit down, but it was really getting chilly now in the dark, so I did the best I could to keep the dog in sight and keep moving. After what seemed like an hour, We stepped out of the woods onto a paved road. Civilization at last! However, I wasn't sure whether to follow the road to the left or to the right. I looked at the dog, and as if he understood my predicament, he started trotting off down the blacktop to the left. I figured it was a 50-50 shot anyway, so I followed him. There were still no houses or lights in sight, but the night was clear enough that I could follow the dog who was following the road. I did find it kind of strange that he didn't stop and sniff things every few feet like most dogs do, but I was really too tired to care at this point. Soon, I began to see some twinkling lights off in the distance. It looked like faraway houses, so I hoped I'd gone the right direction. As I continued along, still following this huge black beast of a dog, I saw a pair of automobile headlights approaching in the distance. I almost started to dash back into the cornfield and hide in case it was some kind of weird stranger, but instead I decided to stay by the road. I did get safely off to the side on the shoulder. The dog stood there with me, waiting. As the vehicle drew near, I recognized it as my uncle's dilapidated old Buick. I was rescued. The car pulled over. My dad jumped out. He was thankful to see me, as I'd been gone for hours and no one knew where I was. He said they had been out looking for me at least 2 hours driving the back roads, trying to find me. Some of my cousins had gone out into the woods, and a couple others had even headed over to a nearby lake to make sure I hadn't drowned. Once I assured him I was okay, that I'd just been lost, I piled into the back seat and fell fast asleep, enjoying the warmth of the Buick's heater. I don't even remember arriving back at the house, as my dad carried me inside and put me to bed. The next morning, over breakfast, all the conversation was about my little adventure the day and night before. I told the whole story about how I'd come lost and how the big black dog had shown up out of nowhere and led me out of the woods and then in the right direction toward the house. I asked both my dad and uncle if they hadn't seen the dog waiting beside me when they stopped in the car. Neither one had any idea what I was talking about. They hadn't seen any dog, just a tired, cold boy standing and shivering on the side of the road. Over the next couple of days, my uncle asked around, and no one had ever seen or heard of such a large black dog that was owned by anyone in the area. And this was a type of farming community that was pretty tight-knit. Everyone knew everyone else. Over the years, I often wondered if maybe I even imagined the dog. But a part of me knows better. I remember what his tongue felt like when he licked my hand, and how soft and warm his coat felt when I stroked him. Maybe the dog was some sort of guardian angel? I suppose an angel could take on any form, and I would have been a lot more scared of a strange person than a big black dog. Either way, he led me out of the woods, and I'll never forget.